So if you need a VPN, go Nord. Use nordvpn.com/Kimber to get a huge discount off your NordVPN plan plus 4 additional months for free. It's completely risk-free with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee. The link is in the show notes. Protect your computer like a cricketer protects its nether region with NordVPN today.
Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen. This is Uncovered, episode 63. I'm your host, Behram Kazi. You can find me at DefMango on Twitter. And with me, as always, is Jared Kimber, who you can find absolutely everywhere. We've got lots to discuss today, and we'll start with Australia versus Pakistan. Of course, Australia won the first test match in Perth comprehensively. And Jared, it was wrong of Mitch Johnson to piss off David Warner, right? Of course, he had to come and score 164 in the first innings, got out for a duck in the second, which is an anomaly. His record versus Pakistan in Australia in particular is stellar, and it's pretty good all over the world, really. But in Australia, it's something really, really special. But how is that for a shut-up call?
Yeah, I thought it was interesting that he cared enough to make a big gesture out of it and everything else. Especially from a guy who was once his teammate. Like, I would have just thought you'd just be like, okay, well, I made runs again. But David Warner makes runs in Australia and he makes runs against Pakistan. So you throw those two things together. I mean, who didn't think he was going to make runs in this series? Especially once we saw the bowling attack, right? Once we saw that bowling attack, we were all like, all right, well, this could get messy for Pakistan quite quickly. And in some ways, they maybe had a better game than I thought they were going to have from a bowling perspective. But unfortunately, that second innings kind of cost them, right?
And yeah, I mean, when you think of it, first 2 days, they competed fairly well. But then it all kind of fell off a cliff on day 3 and day 4. And then ultimately, we had a result that we very much expected. But yeah, I mean, I am very amused by the fact that David Warner has this stronghold over Pakistan, particularly in Test cricket, in all formats really, but in Test cricket, he just takes that to another level. And yeah, I mean, I think Mitch, when he pointed out that David Warner had, worrisome form in Test cricket, and he shouldn't be allowed to dictate terms with respect to when he should, leave the game on his own terms. I feel like now he can leave the game on his own terms.
Well, I mean, he was going to anyway, so I don't know. Do you know what I mean? I don't think that is any difference. I suppose what would I say about that? It would be the fact that I think Mitch Johnson had a very fair argument. I think we talked about before about calling into account Warner's form over a long period of time. But if the last 3 tests were going to be in Australia, chances are Warner was going to make runs because Warner averages, I don't know, was it 58, 60 or something in Australia? And a lot less than that, overseas. And I think Cheyenne might have sent me, I'm completely throwing Cheyenne under the bus here, but I think Cheyenne sent me a message recently asking if I thought Langer or Warner was better as an opener. And that just wasn't a conversation 3 years ago, right? And, I asked Alex Tudor and Steve Harmison, because we were all commentating together. And I sort of said, those guys, what do you think? Kind of everyone now thinks Langer, right? And I still think it would be split 50-50, right? If you asked everyone, who would come up with remembering both players and all that sort of stuff. But that wasn't a conversation 3 years ago. Warner was, way higher. He's had a rough 3 years. Mitch Johnson I have no problem with him questioning the decision and everything else. But obviously the way it all played out, the personal attacks and the kissing the sky and all that sort of, I mean, come on, guys. Are we, I remember, I'm always reminded of the Mikey Holding thing of Jared. You have to remember the players are children. Line. And in fact, another West Indian cricketer took me aside one stage and said, this is all kids. None of these people have grown up correctly. And they think everything is still the schoolyard. And you watch some of that and you're just like, okay, so David Warner made runs at home again. It gave content to whoever Mitch Johnson was commentating with and everything else. Is cricket the real winner? Is cricket the real loser? I don't know, man.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I remember in Death of a Gentleman, that whole Ed Cowan section, right? It had a young Davey Warner as well. And you guys kind of painted that parallel of how Davey Warner is this attacking batter who opens in Test cricket. And then you have Ed Cowan, who is, who plays attritional cricket. And I think for him to go on and become Australia's 5th highest Test run scorer of all time, put some respect on his name. That's pretty much all I'm going to say. And lots of great stories and arcs coming out of Australia's win. And we'll talk about all of them. But before that, I just want to talk about the whole Usman Khawaja black armband situation. And, we've seen in cricket how the game has taken a firm stand with respect to some sort of activism in the past. BLM comes to mind. Everyone took a knee. Those who didn't take a knee, they, did some other version of a show of solidarity. Then we've seen other things, the LGBTQ movement. And Ukraine wasn't a big thing in cricket, but it was in sport. So when Usman Khawaja writes all lives are equal on his shoe, why is the ICC telling him that all lives are not equal? Do you see a double standard there, or what? I just want to know your thoughts on it.
Look, it's a weird world that we're in. The truth is, I remember I covered the game where Mo and Ali had the Palestine wristbands. I think
it was a wristband.
Yeah. I covered that game, and there was a lot of people who were very upset. And I said, look, at the end of the day, boards have to actually sanction players and have to stop players from doing it, because you would end up with like a million different messages in, all the time, or they have to get on board like that COVID season in the NBA where the players had, so much stuff going on in the court. They had, whatever they wanted on the back of their shirts and everything else. It kind of has to be one way or another. And in a game like cricket where everything is so incredibly political, right? That was always going to be another contentious issue. There are certainly, a lot of people who weren't going to be taken with that. But you can't actually stop athletes doing this. That's the most important thing. I think we've gone past. Do you know the story of Mahmoud Abdul Rauf, the NBA player?
Yes, I do. Actually.
So when he did it, the NBA could essentially just move on from him. Right? They could just say, "Oh, you're not going to get any contracts anymore." I don't think you would have now an NBA player who's scoring, 23, 24 points a game, one of the best shooters in the game, just disappear because of political beliefs or anything else. You will get Colin Kaepernick type players who will disappear, or on the fringe, and you can push them to the side. But those main players, Usman Khawaja is not going to get dropped. The ICC is not going to send him for 20 games. There might have to be sanctions just to stop everyone else doing it. But right-wing athletes do this, left-wing athletes do this. You sometimes get weird messages from athletes that, that don't make any sense. I always find it funny. We always say that there should be no politics in sport, where I don't know how you stop politics being involved in anything. And, politicians get involved in sport all the time. And there's this idea that someone who hosts a TV show can come out and say something, but someone who's a professional athlete who's got to the top of their game can't. Where do we draw the line? I understand there's things with sponsors and everything else. But the truth is, if a player really wants to say something, they're probably going to say it. And there's a long history of athlete activism. And many of those athletes are now remembered to be absolute legends, right? From, the John Carlos, Tommy Smith,
what about that Australian runner from the Olympics?
He's the third one. He's the third one there, right? But if you go back, Muhammad Ali and Arthur Ashe and what's his name, Faisa Lalisa, like all these different athletes who've spoken up about different things. Women athletes who've spoken up about their treatment compared to male athletes, and generally those athletes are remembered better. But if you do something like that, I don't think it's any different. This is going to sound very weird, but I was thinking about this today. It's no different from the person who comes in to your work and sprouts off their own political opinions quite a bit. Eventually, there is a possibility that the boss might say, we don't want that anymore. This is causing division. This is causing problems. We're going to move on from you. There will be repercussions. Free speech is a concept that is very misunderstood. Free speech doesn't mean you get to say whatever you want without consequence. There isn't consequence-free speech. So when Usman Khawaja does that, he's obviously going to get a lot of people from different communities who are going to be very upset. But that is part of what he's doing, and he's made that choice. And there are going to be some times when there are going to be players who say things. I mean, if you want to go back, Ian Botham talking about why it should be okay for him to kill, was it deer? Over and over again. He was making political points, right? During his career, he made lots of them. Lots of players have done them. We now have Pat Cummins. We have the Muslim players in the Western countries not wanting the alcohol sponsorship on them. We have, women's teams who are, also saying we don't want to be sponsored in this particular way. All these sorts of things happen in the Fair Break tournament, not having gambling sponsors, for instance. All these different things are happening in cricket and in global sport. And the idea that the rest of us are seeing all this stuff and the athletes aren't, and they're not going to make comments about it is kind of ridiculous, right? Like you and I are going to make comments about things that we care about over and over again. And so are the athletes. But the problem is that, you know, maybe one of the most famous ones is the Daryl Morey one in the NBA, where he criticized China, and that cost the NBA, you know, millions and millions of dollars. And, you know, eventually it leaves Houston. Probably both sides were probably hoping for that. But you can't stop people saying what they think. Like it's illegal to be say anti-Semitic things in Germany. People still say anti-Semitic things in Germany. These things don't stop, and I think that's the most important thing to remember from athletes. I don't see why they should be held to a different account to anyone else. But as I said, there is no such thing as consequent free speech, right? Khawaja's not going to jail for what he said, but maybe there will be sponsors who won't want to be involved with Cricket Australia. Maybe there'll be stakeholders in Cricket Australia who won't want Usman Khawaja there. Maybe he won't get offered jobs, right? Afterwards. All those things are very, very possible. But those things have been happening for years upon years, right? We have a game where we still have, you know, Mike Gadding and Graham Gooch very much involved with cricket, despite the fact that they went to play apartheid cricket, you know, on those rebel tours. Cricket forgives a lot. My favorite one about all this sort of stuff is how essentially in the end, none of this matters, was when Muhammad Amir made his comeback and he was playing at Lord's again. And he was standing in front of a sponsor, and I can't remember, it was one of the financial sponsors of the ECB. So I just Googled them and just put in, you know, that company, I can't remember who it was now, and fraud, or that company and crimes. And there's this huge skew of crimes of how they've ripped off like mum and pop investors, how they've done things where they propped up governments in various countries, how they committed financial fraud and everything else. And I put a tweet out going, Muhammad Amir is standing in front of this sign for this sponsor. Cricket is very forgiving. So many people were upset. Right? So many people were upset because they were like, you can't compare Muhammad Amir to a bank. And I was like, yeah, but we do forgive people. And if people make us money, we do forgive them, right? We're sitting here talking about David Warner, right? I know people who told me absolutely he should never have played for Australia again. I can't remember the last time I've heard that. Right? After a while, things get forgotten and things move on. Usman Khawaja is already probably a problematic person in certain parts of Australian culture because he says things that he believes and has before, and has talked about racism within cricket and treatment within cricket, and you know, things that microaggressions and all these different things. He's going to continue to talk about them, Bayram, though, because he's a human being, right? That's what they do.
Absolutely. And with me personally, you know, you brought up the Moeen wristband incident, and back then I remember I even had the opinion that sports shouldn't be mixed with politics. But then post BLM, I just felt like cricket has taken that plunge forward, and these sort of things, even though they polarize opinion, Usman Khawaja is just speaking his own truth. And I thought that it wasn't as much a political statement as much as it was humanitarian. Of course, there are layers to this, and I'm not disagreeing with that. But I mean, he's the people's champ. He is a vocal person. He has been throughout his career. Like you said, he has many admirers and many people who probably hate him for that. And I'm just happy that he continues to do that, because we need characters like that in sport. I enjoy it. For sure.
Just to go into the politics, it's interesting. When I started my career, we were told that all over and over again. Politics should never be in sport. When I started to do Death of a Gentleman, I was like, wait a minute. How do you take politics out of sport? I don't even understand how you're supposed to do it, right? And at a certain point, it's a really naive take, and it doesn't hold any water at all. Also, let's just go back. Muhammad Ali, right, was a really important person because of what he did. The West Indian cricket team were a political force at times, right? Basil D'Oliveira was a political force, even when he didn't want to be, right? You know, the Pakistan and Bangladeshi women's teams, the Afghanistani women's team, right? These are all political, and a lot of them would choose not to be political, right? You know, the classic Basil D'Oliveira tried to stay away from politics as much as he could, while politicians were literally staring at him. And you look at cricket. Cricket is almost the most political sport. And we're never going to disentangle it from politics. You know,
Jay Shah is the son of Modi's right-hand man.
You say that, that's not even a big one in cricket, right? Imran Khan literally was told by the CEO of the PCB, this is how we should structure cricket. And he went, no, we're not doing that. Has Pakistan had 2 leaders who were first-class cricketers of recent times? Like, it's Ranatunga, Sanachya Surya, right? It's
Shakib is going into politics.
Shakib, Srisanth Ran, right? Gautam Gambhir. There's heaps of these sorts of things happening in cricket and politics all the time. And that's before you get to the bigger stuff, right? Of John Howard trying to take over the ICC. The formation of the ICC was a political act, right? All these things are political. And I understand people who say we don't want that, but I always said the same thing. When you can find a way to disentangle politics from anything, we'll take it out of sport. But the truth is that politics does intertwine with every part of life in the same way that business does.
Yeah.
You can't take business out of cricket. You can't take politics out of cricket. And if that's going to be the case for Jay Shah, or that's going to be the case for Imran Khan, or that's going to be the case for Malcolm Turnbull, who's upset that the Australian team have played with sandpaper, or whatever that may be, then it also what's his name? Was it Rishi Sunak got involved in the Johnny Bairstow? All that sort of stuff. If those things are going to happen, I think it's very fair. If Rishi Sunak has an opinion on a stumping, right, then I think Usman Khawaja can have an opinion on what is happening in one part of the world that he is following as well. Yeah. No one's saying that Rishi Sunak is an expert on cricket, and no one's saying that Usman Khawaja is an expert on the Israel-Palestine conflict. But to say he can't have an opinion, I'm sorry, I don't even know how that would work, right? And it won't. So he's going to, and we then have to deal with the repercussions of that the same way we have to deal with the repercussions of everything else that goes on in cricket.
Absolutely. And sometimes, politics and capitalism, they clash. And like you said, there are repercussions. But anyway, I think we've spent enough time on this. Let's get back to the fantastic arcs that we've had as a result of this test match. And Usman Khawaja is one of them, right? Now, he scored 40 odd in the first innings, 90 in the seconds. He's like the antithesis to David Warner in many ways, right? He takes his time. He's also a left-hander. And I just want to point out, and shout out to Shayan once again. He helped me dig up this data. 42 innings since Usman Khawaja's comeback, ever since he scored those twin tons in that Ashes test in Sydney, in a game that he was never supposed to play. He played that because Travis Head got COVID, right? Let's not forget that. And he did the whole LeBron celebration and all of that fun stuff. Since then, he has scored 2,248 runs in 42 innings. And his average is 60.75, 700s, 1150s. And in this period, amongst all batters who have scored more than 500 test match runs, Usman Khawaja has the highest average. This is a great story. You could probably write a book on it.
It's really interesting. I was there when he made his first, he played his first test, and the hype around him was ridiculous for what was a bit of a nudgy average knock with a couple of nice shots square of the wicket. I remember, it must have been around 2013, there was a lot of people who said he was really unlucky not to come back. But we've talked about this before. His career arc is so ridiculous because he goes through periods where it doesn't look like he's ever going to go out. It goes through periods where he doesn't look like he's going to make a run. And that's even at the first class level. It's not just an international thing. And when he clumps runs together, they're at an incredible rate. But I do think now what he's probably done is, we know he's an intelligent person. And I think it might even be in Eddie Cowan's book where he's talking about, or maybe he wrote an article about it at one stage, I can't remember, but he was talking about, smart cricketers sometimes have trouble not overthinking everything, right? And sort of getting into that flow state, or whatever the buzzword is for flow state now, right? Getting into that zone because their head's whirring. And I think that if you look back at Usman Khawaja's career, that's probably something that has happened to him before, where there's almost been too much going on in his head, and occasionally he's found a way to turn it off. Because I think now he's kind of worked out the best way to be able to perform for himself. And, some of this is also he's reached peak batting age, right? Like sometimes we go looking for all these different reasons why someone is good. And then we think back and we're like, well, how much of it is that his body hasn't fallen apart? He got to 37. Maybe he started to peak a little bit later than other people. And then he's managed to hold on to it. But look, it's been a fantastically weird career. And he's going to end up with, what's his current batting average in Test cricket? Like he's not that far off averaging 50, right?
Yeah, that's what I would think.
And I know there were rumors in the Ashes that him and Warner might go this summer. I don't know how much of that was just people projecting because of his age, or whether I certainly hadn't heard anything specifically. But there must be a part of him that's like, I don't know, 2 or 3 more years of this, and I average 50, and then I can write whatever I want on my shoes.
Yeah, absolutely. And Cheyenne, sorry to throw you under the bus again, Cheyenne, but he said that there's a solid case of him being the best test batter in the world in this period. And, maybe we can do a podcast on that someday. But anyway, talking about late bloomers, there's been another one in Australia. Now, Mitch Marsh was not in Australia's plans at the start of the Ashes. He replaced Cam Green, I think scored a ton, right? And cemented his place over there. Wasn't bowling much. And in this first test match, I thought to myself, I was like, maybe it makes more sense for Australia to go for Cam Green because they can get more out of him with the ball. Because, of course, Mitch Marsh's body doesn't allow him to bowl as frequently. And then he goes on to take Babar Azam's wicket in the first innings, scores 90 with the bat in his first innings, and 63 not out in the second. He bags the man of the match or player of the match award and gives that medal to a kid in the stands. So a very feel-good story. So I hope everyone who was pissed off at him for putting his feet on top of the World Cup trophy is chilled out right now. But it's been a fantastic arc for him as well. And I, for one, did not see this coming, especially at the expense of Cam Green, who was, billed up as the next big thing in Australian cricket.
Yeah, I mean, the Cam Green hype, I tried to talk about that beforehand. And the thing is, you and I think I've probably written about this before, but all-rounders don't develop on the curve that you want them to. They it's usually quite a slow development. Like even Ben Stokes. Ben Stokes is probably at his peak batting powers over the last 2 or 3 years. It's taken him a long time to get to that level, right? And you see that with all-rounders again and again. And I think this is the version of Mitch Marsh that Australia always thought they were going to get. And for a long period of time, he had, the lowest batting average of a number 6 ever? Right, like
Something
it was.
like that.
We're not talking about he was struggling a little bit. We're talking about like it was dark, right? And he wasn't taking a lot of wickets and everything else. But his basic skill, the ability, if you think about him, almost like a Zach Crawley type, that ability to hit good length for 4 because you're so tall and your front step is so big. You're always on top of the bounce and everything else. He's probably matched that with a pretty good back foot game, which I'm not saying he didn't have when he was younger, but I don't think he was ever as consistent hitting the short ball when he was young. But those 2 things, the bowling, I've always thought he's a pretty good bowler just because of, the height and the strength that he has. You want him to be a 5th bowler. He's probably almost at his best as a 6th bowler just when you need him, but he can nibble the ball around a little bit, and he does have some skills. And, weirdly enough, I brought up Zach Crawley, but Zach Crawley is a really good matchup for Mitchell Marsh as a bowler. And he has those sorts of, he can bother some people with his height and the way he hits the wicket and, and shuffling the ball away from them a little bit. But he was always supposed to be a great cricketer. Cricket Australia essentially wooed him away from Aussie rules football, where he would have had a much safer career. He's probably earned a lot more money now than he would have in Aussie rules football. But, they went after 2 guys quite aggressively, Alex Keith and Mitch Marsh, because they wanted one of them to be one of the next great all-rounders. Neither of them really did it. Alex Keith kind of bombed out a little bit, ended up back in football, I think, eventually. Mitch Marsh is just starting to get there now at what? How old is he? 31?
He's 30-something. He was there in the 2015 World Cup squad. So he's been around for a while.
Yeah, so he's 32. So, again, you look at a player reaching peak age and developing and everything else. And it takes a long time for an all-rounder, I think, specifically to get all the skills they want. But if you look at that, I remember I wrote a piece, it must have been 2013 or 2015 Ashes. I can't remember which Ashes it was, but one of the ones in England, where I said that there's such a fine line between being a joke and being a legend as an all-rounder. And you could see in Stokes and in Mitchell Marsh that they both had the basic ingredients that they needed, but Stokes was going in one direction and Mitch Marsh was going in the other, right?
Yeah.
Right at the moment, you probably take Mitch Marsh over Stokes just because he can bowl, right? And this is the first time ever in their careers where you would even consider that. But Stokes is, through all 3 formats, certainly not as good a cricketer as Mitch Marsh. Having said that, he's still a better batter than Mitch Marsh. We've seen him in, high pressure situations. But Mitch Marsh now has slogged at the top of a one-day World Cup final. He destroyed Pakistan. Was it Pakistan? No, New Zealand. in the T20 World Cup final. Like, there's quite a bit happening suddenly with Mitch Marsh, where it would have been, if you would have compared him to Ben Stokes 2 years ago, people would have been like, what's wrong with you? But that's how quickly his entire fortunes have changed.
Yeah, how the night has, changed. And would you say he is the most decorated out of the three Marshes now in that family?
Yeah, I mean, his brother and his dad were never sexy players. Let's be honest. You would not have seen anything of Jeff Marsh, would you?
Nope.
Do you remember when we were all looking at Shy Hope and going, oh my God? Yeah, so we had about a decade of that, of Jeff Marsh. At a time when we didn't understand strike rates as well. But even so, like, I don't know. I can't speak for all young people in Australia, but I remember thinking, can we just get someone in who can hit some boundaries? Like, and he did a really good job. Sean was such a frustrating player, a little bit like Mitch, again, a late developer, issues off field in a way that their father did, and their father was so, straight down the line. And whereas the two sons certainly had their issues off field and everything else. But yeah, I think if you look at it, certainly Mitch has the highest highs as a player. If you're asking me which one you want to watch play, Mitch Marsh first, and then, maybe Sean Larkin is in form second, and Jeff is probably away behind that. But, I don't think so. Jeff Marsh is remembered. Jeff Marsh is one of the first cricketers that is probably people started to mash the two formats together in a positive way. So if you look at, we talked to, I don't know if it was you and I, but I talked about Alan Lamb with someone recently, where a lot of people would say Alan Lamb wasn't a particularly good player because his test record wasn't that good. But actually, if you look at his one-day record, it was exceptional. If you look at Jeff Marsh averages almost 40 in one-day cricket in a period where just no one did, right? It just, yes, it was a strike rate of 55, which is hilarious to say out loud, but he averaged 40. But he averaged 33 in test cricket at a strike rate of 35. He wasn't really an Australian style of player in that format. But yeah, I think probably if Mitch Marsh has one more good year, he probably goes past the other two quite comfortably. I think you could make an argument. I think he's the most naturally talented of the three Marshes. And I haven't seen a lot of his sister playing basketball, so I can't make any comments there.
Fair enough. And some people are upset in the comments. Arco says that, come on, Jared, 2009 Sean Marsh in the IPL was sexy for sure. Yeah, he was pretty good back then.
When he got going, he was very sexy. But Arco, you have to look at all the other years when he did not do that.
Yeah,
right? Like, there were many years where he just was like absolutely putrid.
Yeah, we've also got some other people in the comment section. Ayush Sinha is here. Alexander Cockburn, I remember your name now. It's just so fantastic. He's also here once again. Livingston is here. RSR is here and says that Khawaja has scored runs in all conditions in that period. Very good observation. Yes, he has. I mean, if you're averaging 60, it's probably because you've scored runs all over, right? Moving forward, and this is probably the best arc that's come out of this test match, because Nathan Lyon now has 500 test match wickets. Curator at the Adelaide Oval all of those years ago. Was never supposed to be this good. And according to Gideon Haigh, his skill is cricket's most rubbish skill, right? Right arm off spin. And now he is part of an elite list of bowlers in test match cricket, and only the third Australian alongside Shane Warne, who has 708 wickets, and Glenn McGrath, who I think is 565. Now he's joined them. And that's amazing. Like, he should be nowhere near those names, but he is. And that's his legend, isn't it? Gary.
I mean, there's 8 guys, isn't there? And so if you go through them, he's by far the most unlikely of that list. They all had to overcome some various things. Warne obviously had, the physical issues that he had. McGrath probably had the fact that Warne was at the other end and was taking a big chunk of it. McGrath had to do it in a bowling attack where everyone was taking wickets. Broad had to learn the game when he came in. Nepo baby, jokes aside, like, he wasn't a fully developed player when he first came in. Again, Anderson had another major bowler at the other end. Courtney Walsh doing it for the West Indies over that long period when it was hard enough to break into the bowling attack when he came in. Murali is a one-man attack. Ashwin not playing away from home. And Kumble having to do it on flat tracks. I think I've named everyone on that list that wasn't Nathan Lyon. But at the age of 18, every single one of those players was thought to be an international quality player, right? Like, and a potential star. There's a big difference between potential star and becoming a star, and you have to give them all credit for, what they did. and how they developed. But even Jimmy Anderson, who at the age of 17, no one knew who he was. By 18, he was rushed into Lancashire's side, right? Lyon's the one that doesn't fit that template, right? Lyon is the one that you kind of, even when he was picked, it felt like he was another one of the, Australia's just picking another wacky spinner again. And, we're going to have to remember his name along with Jason Frazier, right? Like, it never made sense. And then you get 2 years into his career and he gets dropped twice in the 1 year, right? And I don't think with those, I from that point forward, it's just astonishing how consistent he is and everything else. But he's such an odd cricketer. We've got, as you know, got a feature that I haven't quite finished. If everyone in my house could stop vomiting, I might have a chance of finishing at one stage. But, we've been working on this other feature about Nathan Lyon. I think he really is such an outlier in so many different ways. I'll tell you one stat that I've got from the other piece, which I think I was just looking at here. So while he is, while he plays in Australia, while he plays in India, I'll start that again. Sorry, I'm going to get this right eventually. While he's in Asia, I can't even find the stat either. While he's in Asia, I think he averages something like 31.1. And the global average, the Asian average for all spinners at that time is about 30.8. So he's not getting the Asian boost that pretty much every other spinner does. And, we know partly that's because of the top spin and everything else. But when he bowls in Australia, he has taken, I want to get these numbers roughly right, but I think there's 450 wickets that have been taken by spin during his career in Australia, of which he has taken 237 of, right?
Wow.
The other spinners average 62 and he averages 31. And that's not the normal pattern you see of guys, even if you've got someone like Graham Swan, who's probably the best person to compare him to, although certainly not for longevity. But if you look at Swanee has a 3 or 4 run drop in Asia. Like it helps his overall average to play in Asia, and he's a good bowler at home. Whereas other spinners occasionally take wickets in England and everything else. No one takes wickets with spin in Australia outside of like Nathan Lyon. And then he gets to Asia and he doesn't get a bump. It's he's just a remarkably weird cricketer from beginning to end. And I don't know if you know about where he's from, but he's from a town that has, let's say 7,000 or 8,000 people in it. And even the fact that he's from New South Wales, and they've obviously produced some incredible players, Bradman and Glenn McGrath, and he's not far from Wagga Wagga, which I think had Jeff Lawson, Michael Slater, and Mark Taylor, right? And yet Young doesn't have this lineage of great players, and instead of going to Sydney, he ends up in Canberra. So he goes from one outpost to another outpost. Like it's remarkable that Nathan Lyon made it. And I'll tell you one last thing about him, which I've always found really interesting. There's an Australian spinner called Peter Sleep, who you might not have heard of.
I actually have. We did a whole thing on spinners in Australia, remember? Australian spinners. Of course, I know about Peter Sleep now.
So Peter Sleep was working with Cricket Australia for, I want to say, mid-2000s, and he stopped working with them, and he was interviewed somewhere. And I tried to get him to chat to me about this, but he never wanted to. But he basically said there was no way Australia could have a spinner that came from inside the system. It would have to be someone who came from outside the system. And his thought was that they weren't training spinners correctly and that the next great spinner would come from outside. Now, Nathan Lyon's kind of in and outside the system. He's not from one of the major cities. And Canberra is certainly not within the system when you think about it. It's basically Nathan Lyon and Brad Haddin are the two cricketers from Canberra who have come through that area, even if Lyon's not from Canberra, but went through Canberra. Michael Bevan was born in Canberra, but, he was so good. He was in Sydney really, really early on. But then you've got the fact he goes to South Australia and can't even get onto into the squad, and ends up as the grounds as curator, as you said before. It's interesting that Peter Sleep was kind of right, that it had to be this guy that came so far out of the system. And even Todd Murphy, the next spinner who might be Lyon's replacement, is another country spinner who was kind of picked from nowhere by again. So there's something to be said for the fact that these guys coming from outside the system are slightly better than inside the system. But it's a remarkable story.
Yeah, that's a pretty interesting point. Australian spinners, diamonds in the rough, right? And you've probably said too much over there. We have to record a footmarks on this, right? We have a whole footmarks planned on Nathan Lyon, so you guys can listen to all sorts of fun stories in that one. Let's talk a bit about Pakistan before we end this segment and take a break. So I'll sum it up for you, right? Pakistan competed well for 2 days. Even you know that. Well is also somewhat relative. It's relative to Pakistan's performances in Australia.
Not terrible.
Yeah, there you go. Right. And the off-field controversies haven't stopped. Literally a new one today, a leaked call of the chairman talking about players and their agency and that sort of stuff. So it keeps getting worse, but I won't get into that. Let's talk about the big ones, right? Babar isn't barbering, even though it's worked over by Pat Cummins quite brilliantly in the second innings, right? And Shaheen in particular isn't Shaheening. That's a cause for concern for Pakistan. And then, Rizwan benched for Sarfaraz was a huge, talking point in Pakistani circles. And then also, you want to take 20 wickets, in a test match, and they didn't have 4 frontline bowlers. They had one part-timer, 1 Fahim Ashraf, and 3 frontline bowlers. And even though 2 debutants did really well, they got like 12 out of the 15 wickets, right? Amir Jamal and Khurram Shahzad, and there's a lot to like about them. It just seemed like Pakistan were half-cooked or half-baked.
Yeah, I was thinking about the bowlers quite a bit, that I think Australia is probably the last place on earth that you want to go without 4 frontline bowlers. And it might be the place that you actually would prefer to take 5 frontline bowlers if you back your batters. Just because once your batters get in Australia, there's a very big chance they're going to make runs, right? Like the pitches do flatten out. The pitches are so hard, they knock those balls soft, and then you should be able to make runs after a period of time. So I thought it was an interesting move going in with that kind of thing. But yeah, there's a lot of messes. The whole Rizwan thing is quite messy. Look, I think Babar just looks out of form, and Shaheen just looks a yard slower than he was, right? Like, how much of that is just injuries? How much is that he just hasn't recovered enough and he's been...
How much of that is incorrect rehab post-injury? Because we haven't seen peak Shaheen, right, after he injured himself.
He might have come back too early. Who knows? Who knows what the actual reason there is? But certainly, I think, certainly you're right that there is an issue with both of those guys. But yeah, it was messy. I thought Pakistan played well, considering, like, looking at it on paper. I thought it was going to be Australia would make 700 and bowl them out for 150 twice kind of deal. And it certainly wasn't that kind of game. Although by the end, it kind of didn't matter.
Well, I mean, if they had taken their chances, they missed 3 chances in the first innings, right? 2 drop catches, 1 missed stumping, which kind of, put Sarfaraz under the scanner. If you want to defeat or even compete with Australia in their own backyard, you've got to take those chances and half chances. I think that's a given. And Pakistan always lets themselves down with respect to their fielding. So I think I'm not saying that that's why they lost. They lost because they were outclassed in all 3 departments by a team which is far better than them in Test cricket. That's the reality of it. But yeah, there are things which will be concerning. Like, will Shaheen ever be the same bowler again? I mean, I do have some wishful thinking that tells me that he will, and Babar will come back to form. But even with Babar, he's supposed to be the successor to the Fab Four, and now he might end up as that player that never lived up to his potential in Test match cricket, and that's a scary thought.
I mean, I wouldn't be too worried about it. I just think he hasn't been seeing the ball as well of recent times. Maybe not quite as sharp. So I wouldn't worry about it from that point of view. But yeah, as it currently stands, certainly it's not looking as good as it could. But no one expected them to win any of these tests anyway.
Absolutely not. And Arco says that Pakistan batting made me fall asleep. I think they were, sure, there's that whole Baz ball generation thing that's happening. But, Australia weren't playing quickly in the second innings either. And Chiteshwar Pujara was one of the most successful batters on Australian soil. And India is the only team that's had the wood over them in the last 35 tests or so. So I don't know. I don't know about that. I wasn't too bothered with them kind of grinding it out. But they clearly couldn't do that in the second innings, right?
Weirdly enough, I know Australian cricketers don't do this, but I kind of think that batting defensively in Australia is not the worst way to go about things. But you then have to bat 160 overs. You can't bat 100 overs. Because if you bat 100 overs, you're essentially just gifting them 2 shots at the new ball with you without making any runs. The innings has to be stretched out. You really, really have to go all in on that theory. And look, if we're being honest, I just don't think they're quite good enough or in good enough form to be able to do that at the moment.
Yeah, no, definitely not good enough. And Shan Masood actually said that he was proud of the batting unit batting for 100 overs. That was a bit surprising to me. I mean, that's not the sort of statement you expect from the captain. But anyway, there's a comment over here by Sukant, which is asking, why is the mango deaf? I know some of you guys know in the comment section, so tell Sukant why my handle is Def Mango. But anyway, on this note, we'll take a break. You're watching Uncovered with Jared and Behram, and stay tuned for lots of more cricket discourse. We'll be back after this short break.
Calling all sports nerds. If you dream of a career within sports, consider joining my course, Fans with Laptops. It looks at features, pods, video essays, and kind of everything else I've ever made, plus a lot of content sharing techniques. It is my brain and career exposed for your benefit. Fans with Laptops will help you channel your passion and maximize your potential. Enroll now for a small fee and embark on your sports journey today.
All right, you're watching Uncovered with Jared and Behram. Welcome back. And what do we have next? West Indies versus England. So the ODI series, West Indies won 2-1, but the T20 series has started and it's 5 T20 internationals. West Indies lead 2-1. And in the first T20 international, Andre Russell was the star of the show. He's making his comeback in the West Indian maroon after a prolonged period of time. And a lot of people thought that he might, or his West Indian career might be done. But here he was, took his career best figures of 3 for 19 and then struck an unbeaten 29 of 14 deliveries to win the game for the West Indies. Can their supporters get excited again, Jared?
Well, then he got smashed out of the park in the next 2 games and cost him a match, didn't he? Look, I think at the moment they're trying to get him to be one of their 5 bowlers. I just don't think his bowling is strong enough to do that anymore. I'd be shocked if it lasts a whole World Cup, especially against the best hitters. There's so many good signs for the West Indies and the way they're playing T20 right at the moment that it's unfair to nitpick at them. But being that there are so many good signs, we now start to think, well, can they pull this together and make it work in the World Cup? The opening's still a little bit weak, King and Mayers. They're both quite weak against spin, so I kind of think if you bring a spinner on, you can stop them. But then you've got Shaiho, Puran, and Hetmeyer in the middle, who are quite strong against spin. So it's a nice combination. And then they've been batting. Akil Hussain's been batting at number 10 at times in this tournament. So their batting is quite deep, and their hitting is quite deep, which is how they won the first game. I can't remember whichever one it was. And also, they lost the last game. Romario Shepherd wasn't playing, and he's obviously been in incredible form. But it's really interesting. There's a lot of right-arm seamers who I think a lot of international batters won't mind playing against. Joseph is just not consistent enough. Andre Russell is probably the worst death bowler in the world. Jason Holder's quite expensive as well. Romario Shepherd's great in the middle, but you probably want to use one of the other guys in the middle. But it takes them back to the kind of lineups we saw when they were the best team in the world, which is that ability to hit to 8, 9, 10 and just back themselves out of trouble. And Andre Russell certainly looked okay with the bat. Shai Hopes looked more like a T20 player, I suppose is the best way of putting it. So there's a lot of positive signs there. But we have to be honest, England hasn't played particularly well at the moment, and they probably should have won a couple of these games.
Yeah. Hope actually bagged a PSL contract. He'd be playing for the Lahore Qalandars for this entire season. So maybe, that can help him up his game further.
He played in the BPL, didn't he, as well, before that, I think?
He also played a couple of games in the PSL. But he hasn't been a sure shot starter in these leagues, even if he has bagged those contracts. This time he will be.
I don't even think he was a sure shot starter in the CPL at times. So, he's really changed. I'm so impressed with someone who changes their game when, they realize that they're going to be obsolete. And that's essentially what he did. And he could have just kept making lots of runs and told everyone that was fine. And he didn't. He changed his game and he's got a lot better. There's a lot to like about the West Indies team, but there is a lot of Holder, Russell, Shepherd, Joseph, Mayers. There's a lot of right arm, medium, fast, medium there. And how much that all holds together, I don't know. But Moti bowled beautifully in both games that he's played in. The first game, he was unhittable. The second game, England went after him. And he was the one that pulled the West Indies back into that game and got them back in front.
He took 1 wicket for 9 runs in his quota of 4 overs in the second game. So that is unheard of. I mean, it is heard of, but it doesn't happen too frequently.
No, I mean, it was a fantastic effort. And England was so upset that the next game they decided to try and whack him out of the attack and couldn't, right? So, it tells, and that was with, I think when he came on, there might have been no wickets down as well, right?
And he also took Livingston's wicket, which is a big one, right? And sure, that game had lots of good performances. Brandon King scored 82, Rovman Powell scored 50, even Sam Curran scored a 50 in the middle order. But I think both these performances just stands out. And I think he won West Indies that game, fair and square.
Yeah, look, he's been fantastic. Gives him another option. Akil Hassan's a defensive bowler who can, and Moti can bat, of course, but I don't think he can hit boundaries the way that the way that Akil Hassan does. But it gives him multiple options. I think he's a fantastic young. I keep saying young. He's not that young, but he's a fantastic bowler. who really understands what it is to get the most out of himself. It's been, I promise you, when TalkSport offered me the gig, I was like, okay, I'm gonna have to commentate this, because I think I commentated West Indies England like this time last year, and it just wasn't as interesting. This has been really, really fascinating. Like even the one dayers, and I was not expecting that. I also had to, commentate England women, Indian women in the morning, and then West Indies and England men in the evening. So for a little while, I wasn't sure what time zone I was in, or what format I was covering, or what gender was playing that format. But no, I've really enjoyed the West Indies England series way more than I thought I would have.
Yeah. I think out of all the international series that are going on currently, that is the most enjoyable one, at least most close one, which makes the cricket all the more enjoyable. And just before we go to England, Nick Puran got 80 odd in the third T20. West Indies lost that game, but he got those runs at first drop. That excites me. I want Nicholas Puran to bat in the top order, and I think they should probably stick with that come World Cup.
It's interesting because the second game he came in at first drop, and we assumed it was matchups because Mayers had gone out, so that was just they were bringing a left-hander. Then the second game, Mayers was still out there, and he went out there to bat. I think that's right. One of the games anyway. Third game, and it's clear they've made that choice. It makes, in some ways, it makes sense for Hope to be 3 and Puran to be 4. And in some ways, it makes sense for Puran to be 3 and Hope to be 4. I don't think there's a wrong answer there. So I hope that they keep flexibility. That would be my big thing. Don't just go with it. But look, I love watching Nicholas Puran. So Nicholas Puran averages 50 against leg spin, by the way. And coming into that game, he averaged something like 15 against Adil Rashid. And Adil Rashid really, really works him over. And I could see the maturity that I've been waiting for with Nicholas Puran's game to come through, the way he's playing that. If you could get Nicholas Puran, and he's a smart kid, he's not a kid anymore, but he's a smart younger player, but he hasn't quite got to that point of, because, he was a slogger for a little while. He didn't play any first-class cricket. He's just a little bit behind his development. Like, his intelligence is here, but his development is still trying to catch up with it. If you can match those two things, Nicholas Puran, we still might not have even seen peak Nicholas Puran, and we've seen some pretty good years of Nicholas Puran already.
Yeah, absolutely. He's definitely one of my favorite players on the West Indies team. And Alexander Cockburn has said that Adil Rashid took 1 for 12 from his 4 in the second game. Yes, he did. But let's move on to the third game now. Of course, we spoke about Puran's knock. It took West Indies to a towering first innings total of 222, and England miraculously chased it down. Phil Salt scored a ton, Joss Butler scored a 50, and then Harry Brook had a belligerent cameo at the end. But first on Salt, Alex Hales is retired, from T20 cricket, internationals, that is. And he was not supposed to be part of England's plans in the T20 World Cup, but then was ushered in last moment and played a very crucial role in that World Cup win. Is Phil Salt the obvious successor in that role?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's got the fastest strike rate in the power play in the last 2 years in international cricket. And it might even be in all cricket, but I certainly know it's in international cricket. And it's by a distance. I don't think we've seen an opener with these kinds of numbers probably since maybe peak Hales or peak Luke Ronke, who just scores so much quicker than everyone else. Even someone like Chris Gale would slowly get in, whereas Phil Salt's ability to hit so quickly. I still wonder I still don't trust him 100% against high pace at times. And in the World Cup at the crunchy end, that's what he's going to face, right? He's not going to face as much fast medium. He's going to face, a lot more, whether it be South Africa or India or Australia, Pakistan, all these countries have someone who, New Zealand, have someone who's legitimately quick. And you're probably going to have to go up against one of them. That, I think, is interesting. But everything else about his game, I kind of really have always liked the way he's gone about it. Compared to maybe some of the other England players who came through who I didn't trust as much. Salt's probably the one I've had a little bit more time for. I think he's a really good player, and obviously he gives you a backup wicketkeeper as well. There's a couple of things I like about the way he plays.
Yeah, the backup wicketkeeper thing is actually quite big, and the belligerence bit also. I mean, of course, he will be tested against high pace, but I don't see anyone else kind of, fill that void, particularly because Alex Hales was someone or something special really in this format. And of course, 56 ball, 109, that too unbeaten, that speaks for itself. And sure, Buttler also got 50, but I think more important than Butler's 50 was Harry Brook's 31 not out of 7 deliveries. He's essentially that helped England clinch the thriller, and a strike rate of nearly 443. He's given England something to smile about finally in what has been a very torrid couple of months, or maybe more than a couple of months at this point.
Yeah, I think there was a time watching that innings where I was like, because England got in front quite early on and sort of cruised for a while. And then it was Phil Salt that really got stuck. Moti bowled beautifully to him and, really pulled it back a little bit. And it just felt like, again, England were going to fall apart. And it wasn't until those last 3 overs when I looked at the mass and I was like, no, I think England's in a good chance here. When you look at the bowlers who have to bowl, they're all quite expensive death bowlers on what was clearly at that point a good pitch. Everyone had scored it over 10 runs and over. So, we weren't too worried about the wicket by that stage. And I think there was some thoughts that maybe Brook should have come in ahead of Livingston. Hopefully what that has given England in the future is the ability for them to use Livingston before Brook when they want to, and use Brook before Livingston when they want to, because both of them can fulfill both roles. And they obviously have slightly different strengths and everything else. That was an innings that I suppose technically I knew Brook had in him, but it's very hard to go out there from ball one. And I thought actually if West Indies got a wicket, they might just get home, just because it might take the other batter 5 or 6 balls to be able to do that. And he only faced 7 and made 30 odd runs, right? So it went completely a different direction than I thought it was going to go in. And I think that's, the Livingston Brook, I think there's some feeling within England that Livingston is not quite at the level they want for World Cups from, when you talk to people around cricket. I'm not quite sure. I think I believe in Livingston a little bit more than other people do. But that flexibility,
So do I.
I think
really like him.
Livingston's ability to bat in T20 cricket 4, 5, or 6, and if Brook has that same ability, then the flexibility that you have there is just incredible.
I'm part of both the Glenn Phillips and Liam Livingston hives. And Harry Brook too. I think he was a prodigy, right? That's how he broke onto the scene. And he's so young. He's got father time on his side. And you spoke of flexible and dynamic batting orders in T20 cricket. That's literally the name of the game at this point, right? We're going to be doing foot marks on matchups as well. So keep an eye open for that, guys. Right now, we're going to move towards South Africa versus India. Now, they drew the T20I series 1-1. The first game got washed out. And Suryakumar Yadav was captaining India in this series. And he got scores in both completed games. He got, I think, 56 in the second game that India lost. And in the third, he scored a match-winning ton, which I kind of low-key predicted that there was going to be 100 in that game. So I'm quite happy about that. But he's going to be India's key batter in this upcoming T20 World Cup, isn't he?
His numbers are ridiculous in international T20 cricket. I kind of think there must be a regression at one point.
You're not supposed to average that much with that strike rate. It's just not possible. And
so I kind of feel like his ODI numbers are lower than they should be, and his T20 numbers are higher than they should be. And that, not that they'll meet in the middle eventually, but one will go up and one will go down. But when he's firing, it works really well. And I think he's very good at making 30 decisions, if that makes sense, or even 20 decisions in an innings. And I think we've seen at times in one-day cricket, maybe not as good as making 50 decisions or 80 decisions, right? And every player is different. And, we see that before, but he makes 20 decisions almost as good as anyone in the world at the moment. Like if you could say you would give any player 20 balls and you would know that they would get 20 balls, I don't think you'd pick anyone over Sky. Forget the strike rate and the average, but I just don't think you'd pick anyone else at the moment, just because, Andre Russell's no longer quite at that level, although, still magnificent. Glenn Maxwell, obviously, is the other obvious one. And Josh Butler slowed down a little bit as well.
And Butler, Maxwell, and Sky, these are 3 players that score a lot of runs behind the wicket, right? And Sky is probably the best at that. I think Harsha Bhogle even tweeted that the consistency with which he bats at that strike rate and all that unorthodoxy that he brings to the game, that makes him a very unique and prized asset in this format in particular. I still think he could be used in ODIs if the role clarity is okay. People have lost faith in him in that format, but he's heartbroken as well right now. So prayers go out to Sky.
Yeah, look, I think he's obviously just a fantastic cricketer. It'll be really interesting to see him in the World Cup. I thought he was brilliant at times in the last one.
Yeah, absolutely. And Prateek Jha is here. Yeah, T20 one, of course. Prateek Jha, my man, is in the comments section. Hello to you as always. And we've got Shaurya Pathak as well. So thank you for joining the conversation. Another Indian batter, lower middle order or middle order. He's been very, very impressive of late. His star has risen since the last IPL. I'm talking about Rinku Singh, scored an unbeaten 68 of 39 deliveries in the second T20 International. And I think that, look, take this time period from the start of the IPL to right now. And if you look at the numbers, he probably seems like a sure shot starter for India in this T20 side, but he's not. And that's how crazy that talent pool is.
Look, he's fantastic. He's someone I just want to see more of to make sure. But I think about some of the players that I've seen come through, and you look at him and you just go, he shouldn't fail. He should be as good as he is. And I think we've seen some players absolutely hyped up from what has ended up being fairly moderate IPL seasons, if we're being honest. And I don't want to be on the point where I do that to him as well, because I think it puts a lot of pressure on players who aren't always that good. But I do think he is that next level. I think he's definitely an international quality player. I love the way he hits the ball. And a bit like Sky, and he's not that far off either. That ability to make really, really good decisions, and Glenn Maxwell's another example of this, while still ultra attacking. These are not easy things to do. Like if you're playing in the park with your friends, think about what happens when you start to decide to try hit boundaries all the time. You generally start to make very bad decisions. And we've seen that with Puran and with Maxwell. And, we go, oh, why did they play that shot? But it's very hard once you get going to pull yourself and still make smart decisions. But I really do think that Rinku Singh might be another player there who has that ability.
I think if it comes down to Tilak Verma and Rinku Singh, my pick would be Rinku Singh. And I've thought about this, and it's a tough one. But yeah, I feel like he can be groomed into a supreme finisher. And this is going to be another huge IPL for him, I believe. But anyway, moving forward in the third T20 International, Kuldeep Yadav took 5 for 17. And basically, he was essential in rolling South Africa over for 95, and India won by a huge margin at the Wanderers. But then Tabraiz Shamsi got 1 for 18 in the second T20 International, and he was player of the match. And I think he took off his shoe this time as well, and that upset some people. But what is it about left arm wrist spinners, Jared? They just seem to really dominate the limited overs game these days.
You can't practice for them. There just aren't any, right? There's like 8 of them in the world at any one stage playing professional cricket. I remember when Kuldeep took a bunch of wickets against England at one stage, and everyone's going, oh, England needs to get better against left-arm wrist spin. And so I had a look, and I don't think any left-arm wrist spinner had taken more than 7 wickets in first-class cricket in England. And it was like Brad Hogg, right, who played half a county season at one stage or something silly like that. And I think second on the list was Simon Katic, right? They don't exist. And so it can be tough. And you would say in India's case, well, they have Kuldeep to practice against, and then Shamsi. But Kuldeep and Shamsi are not particularly similar left arm wrist spinners either. You're now also seeing what's the guy's name from Afghanistan?
Noor Ahmed.
Noor Ahmed come around the wicket. So he's a third kind of left arm wrist spinner, and so they're all quite different. Kuldeep's quite quick, and Shamsi's quite slow. I was talking about this actually with Phoebe Graham, who is one of the players in the 100, when we very briefly commentated the women's game. And she was saying that the England spinners are quite quick and Deepti Sharma bowls really, really slow. And that does mess with your rhythm a little bit, right? We would say the optimal speed of a spinner is faster rather than slow, as long as you can get the ball to deviate in the air and drift a little bit and everything else. But when you actually get in a game and you go up against someone who bowls slower, especially slower than what you're used to, sometimes that can get in your head a little bit. And Shamsi is a little bit slower from that point of view, but he's also, Kuldeep is a leg break bowler who's bowling for wrong-uns. Shamsi actually bowls 4 leg breaks. Again, slightly different kind of animal that you're going up against, and it is tricky. But yeah, it's just the hardest thing to practice for because there ain't none of them.
Yeah, and that's actually very interesting takeaway from your monologue over there. That they're very two different kinds of left arm wrist spinners, and I think that's just what makes this sport beautiful. Let's come to the first ODI. Of course, I don't even understand the relevance of this ODI series in what is practically now a T20 World Cup year, and we've just had a World Cup, so we've already kind of experienced that burnout with respect to ODIs. But India played really well. They crushed South Africa. Avesh Khan returned back to the fold, took 4 wickets. Arshdeep took a fifer. I believe it was his first one in ODI cricket. Has to be, right? Because he hasn't played a lot of it. And South Africa were bowled out for 116. Easy chase for India. Sai Sudarshan on debut made a 50, as did Shreyas Iyer. So in all of these stories, I think Sai Sudarshan is the one that is probably worth discussing most. And this is a guy who was phenomenal in the IPL, particularly in the final. I think he is a delightful stroke maker. I really like what I've seen from him thus far. And I originally thought that maybe, that IPL performance would have gotten him this gig, but he averages 63 in List A cricket in 25 innings. And his strike rate is 97 point something as well. Now, this is a serious talent we're talking about over here.
Yeah, I remember looking him up a while back and being shocked at what he's done. No, you're right. I think he's a really good player. Really interesting. I think for me, what I was most interested by in this particular game, so I missed the innings and I saw the scorecard, and you see, South Africa bowled out cheaply by India. And of course, my World Cup brain comes in. And I'm like, oh yeah, of course, Siraj and Bumrah and Sham. And then you have a look. It's really interesting that they did it with,
Here's what's interesting, Jared. I just looked up Arshdeep's ODI record: 4 matches, 5 wickets. So in the first 3 games, he didn't have a wicket, and now he took a fifer.
So him and Avesh Khan, I've been so fascinated by him because from the first time I saw him, I thought he was definitely an international quality bowler, but it hasn't come together 100% for him. And we've seen years in the IPL where he's been quite poor at times, and I think he's moved around franchises a couple of times where a player of his talent probably should be, if not first choice on the team sheet, I mean, the top 3 or 4 players quite a lot. And he hasn't always been in that situation. We've seen him be dropped in certain times and everything. Really interesting to see him come back. Arshdeep, I don't need to be convinced on Arshdeep. The ability to swing the ball both ways with left arm should guarantee you a near career. But why I thought it was really interesting is that whether it's the Champions Trophy or the next World Cup or whatever, it still feels like they're going for wickets. I think the absolute right way that they should play their limited overs cricket, and they're letting their bowlers attack now, which is awesome.
And I mean, the next ODI World Cup is in South Africa, if I'm not wrong. So I suppose this is decent practice. Some comments over here before we take a break. Alexander Steinberg says, was it the first time South Africa lost a pink day ODI? It's a great question. I can't quite recall them losing one, actually.
Yeah, I mean, I think they have, but yeah, there was a whole article about the pink day. Did you see about how the profits don't always go through to the charity?
Oh, really?
I think in 5 years they've only made one payment to the hospital.
Wow.
And there's certainly some issues there. It's a really, really interesting one because it's become, we probably have 3 or 4 of these big days around the world now that are, globally known. And I think the pink limited overs game is certainly one of them. I went to one, it must have been England, South Africa, when I was over there a couple of years ago. The vibe was just incredible. The crowd was completely into it. It was like a party. So it's a real shame if the hospital isn't making as much money as they should be from that again. But yeah, it's still a good kit though.
Yeah. It's quite tragic because it is a lovely kit. And our SR also mentions how Dewald Brevis, Baby AB, is not part of the mix for South Africa. Well, I mean, they've got a lot of young players, right? Tristan Stubbs is there as well. Reza Hendricks is coming of age. They've got a good talent pool to work with over here. But I think that should wrap things up for India versus South Africa. When the World Cup ended, Jared and I were like, oh, this is great. The World Cup's over. We'll go back to 45 to 50-minute shows. And here we are past 1 hour and we have 3 talking points to go. So we'll take a break right now. Join us shortly for some IPL drama, women's cricket in Ireland versus Zimbabwe. You're watching Uncovered with Biram and Jared. Stay tuned after this short break.
If you enjoy our content, we ask you to hit the like button, subscribe, or drop a comment along the lines of, "Wow, Jared, your vibes are immaculate." Additionally, sharing our work on social media, supporting us in super chats, and helping us out on Patreon or Buy Me a Coffee all mean the world to us. Like our stuff? Please support us by whacking that subscribe button like it's a short ball. Or you could just leave a comment expressing your admiration, such as, "Wow, Jared, you're the Aubrey Faulkner of YouTubers." Also, please help us spread the word by sharing our work across social media, back us on Patreon, or also support us with live super chats.
Welcome back to Uncovered. You're with Behram and Jared, and we have to talk about some IPL drama that's happened. And really, it's been blown out of proportion to the point where it's bigger news than it should be. Jared, and those of you who don't know, Hardik Pandya came back to Mumbai, was bought on a cash-only sort of deal, lots of money. And of course, I'm guessing it must have been a stipulation by Hardik that if he wants to come back, he wants to be captain. And Mumbai have gone through with it. Rohit is not captain anymore. And Sky, very recently after he was announced Hardik as captain, posted on Twitter, it was just like a heartbreak emoji. Bumrah has sent out some cryptic stories as well from what I've been told. And yeah, the Mumbai Indians have lost tons of followers on social media. So it's a far bigger reaction than what I suspected. I mean, from a franchise perspective, you're looking towards the future. And Hardik has captained India on so many occasions, and Rohit is towards the wee end of his career. So what's your assessment of all of this, Jared?
I think I've been talking about this for a long time, that cricket has sort of followed that basketball and football style of things where people now support players more than they do teams in certain environments. Well, I think Rohit and Virat are probably the two, and you could certainly throw Dhoni in there as well, but it was more notable because they clashed with each other. We saw it with AB Kane Williamson as well. Like it's there, right? I don't think we can argue that it's not something that's happening out there. And so I think some of the fallout is just the Rohit fans using their voice, and that's what fans should be allowed to do. I don't have a problem with that. I think it's fair to say that Mumbai have handled this horrendously. Right? They haven't been honest. They haven't come out. It seems like they wanted Hardik. Hardik then said, "Well, I will come if I am captain." And they kind of made that decision on the back end rather than making it at the front. I could be wrong. Maybe they wanted Hardik as captain, but
yeah,
I don't know. But it feels like they've done it the other way around, which is they went after the player, and then in order to get the player, they had to make this decision. And then from a PR perspective, it just has been done very poorly. And there aren't a lot of beat writers in the IPL. They're not very good at getting newspapers on side and all the sorts of things that they should be. It's still very amateur the way that a lot of it is run, and this seems to have come to a head. Having said that, I don't think the Mumbai were really going to assume. Was it 400,000 Instagram followers they lost or something stupid?
Yes, that was it.
I mean, but, to be fair, I don't think they would have expected that.
Yeah, no, definitely not. And also something that I didn't expect. I thought that Hardik Pandya was a very popular character in Indian circles, and it seems like he isn't, not with the fans as much as I thought, and definitely not with the players as much as I thought.
He's got a complicated relationship, I think. It actually reminds me a lot of watching Srisanth. Srisanth and Hardik Pandya, I think they came through. They wanted to be the cool guys. They wanted to do things their way. There's a real hierarchical setup within Indian cricket, right? And you are supposed to conform to that and be very respectful. And I don't think those guys always were. Now, as someone who's not very respectful a lot of the time, I can't really throw him under the bus too much. But I've heard more negative things about him from other Indian players and former players than I have about almost anyone else in Indian cricket over the last couple of years. So, yeah, I think that's been hidden by the fact he got really good. And I think perhaps this one has brought it out a little. But he is a lot more popular now than he used to be. 3 or 4 years ago, if I was in a conversation with someone in Indian cricket, I brought up his name, there would just be eye rolls, right? In the last couple of years, it hasn't been like that. But I also don't think it's that far away from the surface with him. And, perhaps that's also part of it again. Also, he left Mumbai, right? So if you're a Mumbai fan, and this is actually a great thing for the IPL, right? Because this is what you want. You want that kind of like what happened with Cleveland Cavaliers when LeBron left to go to Miami and then came back, and a lot of Cleveland fans were really excited, but a lot of other Cleveland fans were like, whoa, this guy left us once before. And I could see why fans would feel a similar way here. And I don't know if that's part of it at all and everything else, but that's kind of a good thing. You don't want to be in a situation where Ben Dunk is the MVP and moves 2 years in a row. No one in the Big Bash even knows, right? You want there to be a connection, and it does feel like there is a bit of a connection.
I mean, clearly there's quite a big connection over here, because Kushal Shah in the comment section has alerted us that they've actually lost more than 1 million followers on Instagram. So that's quite a sizable number. That's like 1/10 of New Zealand's population. So just to put things into context, right? And
it's way more than one. What do you mean 1/10? It's like 25% of New Zealand's population.
Are there 4 million people in New Zealand? I always thought there were like 10 million people in New Zealand.
There's not 10. There's never been 10 million people that have ever lived on the island of New Zealand, let alone at one time.
Okay, let's say 10% of the amount of sheep that live in New Zealand. There you go. Right?
Yeah, it's probably only 1% of the sheep. I don't know.
Anyway, there's actually been more IPL drama, which is not technically directly related to the IPL at all. Naveen ul Haq and CS, our colleague, really wanted us to talk about this. So this one's for you, CS. Naveen ul Haq is banned, or very recently has been banned for 2 years by the IL T20 because he refused to sign a retention notice with the Sharjah Warriors. And he signed instead with the Durban Super Giants, sister team of the Lucknow Super Giants in the SA20. And this is interesting because it shows us that the IPL's influence stretches far beyond the tournaments itself, and it's impacting global franchise leagues at this point.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I suppose we knew that anyway. That's kind of the idea of owning all those different leagues, isn't it? So you can control those players and develop them. You've got to remember that, as one very prominent player said to me at one stage, most of the players in the IPL are on far more money than the advertised amount. So if you've got an IPL franchise with let's say you've got an IPL contract for 250K, all right, and you're an overseas player, chances are you're getting a lot more than that. And so any other league in the world is not going to get anywhere near to matching that. So of course you are going to be going with the main franchise who can make you much more rich. You know, not to mention the advertising, you know, if you're Naveen ul Haq and you end up with a hair supplement, skincare regime, or I don't know, a t-shirt company, you're going to make a lot more money again. You want to keep your owners happy and everything else. But also, I'm talking purely as a professional. And I know this from having talked to a lot of T20 players. Going from all these different camps is sometimes a bit frustrating because, especially once you get to an age where you know what you're doing, you actually want it to be consistent, right? You want to work with the same coaches. You want to do the same things. And maybe you want to toss it up a little bit occasionally, but more often not, you want everyone to understand what you're doing. You want there to be a plan for you for the next 2 years. And that's not always the case when you're hopping between, you know, he turns up to one franchise and they're like, we want to use you in the middle overs. He's like, what? No, bowl at the top and I bowl at the bottom. And they're like, yeah, but we've got those guys. We bought you for the middle overs. All those sorts of things happen. And again, that's probably less likely to happen to a player who's on a bigger plan with an IPL ownership group.
Yeah, I mean, he's retired from ODI cricket, so clearly something was brewing between him and the Super Giants, right? It's glaringly obvious. Also, people in the comment section have told us 5 million is New Zealand's population. That's 20% of New Zealand's population that's abandoned the Mumbai Indians, which is fantastic. And also, Anmol Shrivats says that there was a lot of casteism and that sort of stuff with Hardik Pandya as well, or continues to exist. Colorism and that sort of stuff. So we denounce all of that. Should not happen in the game.
No,
anyway,
I mean, that's definitely another part of it. We've seen that before. Vinod Campbell is another example of that as well.
Yeah. All right. So women's cricket, and there have been lots of developments, but the biggest one is that after losing the T20I series at home by a margin of 2-1, India's women have decimated England in the one-off test match, and they won by 347 runs. They created history as they had never won against England in the longest format before. And you did commentary on this game, Jared. Deepti Sharma, you mentioned her name earlier in this podcast as well. She took 9 wickets in this game. She's probably criminally underrated by that standard. Tell me, what did you observe during your time in commentary in this game?
It was the fastest scoring game in women's Test cricket history, which I thought was really interesting. I think it was like half a run faster than the second highest. So I thought that was absolutely incredible. Watching that happen. That first innings from India was really, really remarkable.
They're like 4 scores of 60 odd, right? I don't even know if that's ever happened before. Hypocost is probably over here somewhere. Tell us something that we don't know, Hypocost.
Which is everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I was sort of watching the replays and stuff to begin with, but that Indian innings was really interesting. England then, I mean, at the end of day one, I was like, this could be a really, really good test match. And by the end of day two, it was like, well, it might be over by lunch tomorrow. And it was literally over by lunch the next day. So it's a bit of a shame from that point of view. And also, obviously, Deepti Sharma, I mean, she's what, the third best spinner? Like, I mean, she's a fine spinner, but I'm not sure she was the best I saw in that game from India. You know, I thought the other spinners were quite significantly better than her. But she did seem to get in the heads of the England players because as I was saying before, as Phoebe Graham was saying, that, you know, it was like they wanted to attack her because she was a little bit slower, but they kept getting themselves into wrong positions. They weren't very good at sweeping. But I think the really surprising thing for India was that they managed to, their fast bowlers managed to run through England on that final day. So Straka is such a fascinating cricketer because I noticed she has no front arm when she comes in, and Steve Harmison noticed that she's got the stutter steps. She's probably got 4 or 5 Ks. If she fixes either of those things or both of them, she's probably got like 4 or 5 Ks extra pace that she could use. But I really like the way that she went about her bowling as well. And the fact that the final collapse was a lot to do with the seam bowling was even more embarrassing for England, because that day two, when the 19 wickets fell, the ball was bouncing and spinning and was vicious and all sorts of things. Day 4, they didn't really get as much of that. It spun, but in a way that you should be able to play. I think it's the first women's test I've ever actually professionally covered. And to be honest, I only got to commentate on the weekend, so I literally covered a session of it. But it's just fascinating. I was commentating with Raf Nicholson. I said, have you seen India use this field before? And she goes, they don't play test cricket. I don't know. And so many times they would do something, and it looks so weird, but it's like, is this a normal thing? Is this because of the conditions? Some of the batting by England was equally bizarre at that different stage, but it was, I mean, the one-sided nature meant it wasn't entertaining, but the bits that I saw, and I saw about the last day, I suppose, in total, and then the highlights, it was just a really enjoyable test match. And realistically, that's what women's cricket needs.
Yeah, and of course, Indian supporters, they probably exercised their wounds from losing the T20 International Series. This is history. They never defeated England in a test match before. And I mean, it's a team that is on the rise. I think Indians women's cricket would really...
Didn't they win the one in England?
Did they? Because I'm pretty sure I read a headline that they've won their first ever match versus England. And if I'm wrong, then I've said something...
No,
misinformed you guys.
You're not the only person I've heard say that. I thought they won it like...
They must have drawn it. Yeah, there you go. Alexander Cockburn says they drew it.
Did they draw it? I remember them celebrating like crazy in a game against England. Yeah, maybe it was a draw now looking at it. And it was at somewhere, it was somewhere random. Actually, they've drawn a couple of times against England, by the way. I didn't realize that. But I remember them celebrating. Was it 2021? Was that the one I was thinking of? No, India in England. Here it is. India won by 5 wickets in Taunton in 2006.
Well, there you have it.
Now that test, by the way, is remarkable because I think they made them follow on. So England. Yeah, so India made 307. England made 99. They made England follow on, and England made 305 in that game, in the second innings. And then India stormed past at 98, or not storm, but strolled past it at 98 for 5. But it's a really, really interesting game. Anyway, sorry. Yeah. I knew there was one. I think it's their first win in India, but this game was telecast. It was a big deal. Crowds weren't as good, although maybe there might have been a little bit more of a crowd if that game had gone into the weekend a little bit more and everything else. But, the quality of cricket was really, really high outside of the shot choice of kind of every England woman.
Yeah, well, thank you for correcting me over there, and apologies to everyone that I misinformed. I think I said this in another podcast as well, so yikes. But Iknath says in the comments that India beat England in a women's test in 2014 as well.
That's the one I was thinking of as well. Yeah, that was the other
there
one.
you go. And then Hypocost has told us something that we didn't know, that England's 2 innings were the shortest and 4th shortest in women's test cricket history. So there you have it.
And yet, women have been bowled out for far lower totals. So part of that was just the speed. That's what I found really fascinating, was just that speed at which both teams were batting. India caught me off guard. I just didn't expect them to make. So India made more on day one of that test against England than Australia did against Pakistan. And I think they were both at the same time, right? So I was sort of flicking between the two. And I was like, how are you outscoring Warner against Pakistan, right? And then England was having a go as well. So, England were a little bit disappointing in that. And if nothing else, hopefully this gives a lot more publicity to the India-Australia game that is coming up soon-ish, very soon.
Yeah. Maybe Baz McCullum should send over a cigar and a glass of whiskey to head the night. Maybe that'll fix it. Anyway, other stuff happened in women's cricket as well. Bangladesh defeated South Africa by 119 runs in the first ODI in East London, which is quite a fantastic achievement for them. They've gotten some good results this tour. And similarly, Pakistan, they've now finished their tour of New Zealand. And even though they lost the ODI series, they very well could have won the second game. They lost it by barest of margins, 1 wicket. And Pakistan had lost Fatma Sana and Diana Baig to injury. So, sorry, not Fatma Sana, Diana Baig and Nida Dar, the captain, to injury. So Fatma Sana, who I spoke about in the previous podcast, she comes up and captains the side. In the second ODI, she scores 90, unbeaten, and takes 2 wickets, and then wins the third ODI, thanks to Bisma Maruf, 68, Sadia Iqbal in the super over, and then also, a great knock by Alia Riaz, which was very out of character. She played slow. And Pakistan has never won an ODI in New Zealand. And prior to this tour, they had never defeated New Zealand in a T20 international. They won a series. And now they've won 3 out of 6 limited overs games on a tour which everyone expected they'd get whitewashed. So this is huge. And even for Bangladesh, right? I'm just like, every week we talk about this. But with all of these competitive results, and, I won't even call them upsets at this point, what I'm noticing is that the hype around women's cricket is more than we've ever experienced in the past.
Yeah, I think the fact that where all these scores are kind of being noticed, some of this is to do with Cricinfo and CricBuzz just putting them in, better place on their side, and also to do with social media and everything else. But yeah, I think you'd be hard pressed to say this isn't the golden period of women's cricket, right? With teams that we didn't think were any good being really good. India beating England in an entertaining but lopsided entertaining game, and the Australian women are still around and still exist as a threat. So I think there's lots of exciting things. There's also teams, on the slide, and the whole New Zealand thing is an interesting one, going ahead. But it's certainly really exciting at the moment.
I think the T20 World Cup in 2024 is going to be really, really competitive, and that's what I'm looking forward to. And Hypocost has confirmed that this was their first win, India's first win over England at home. They've beaten England twice at Taunton 2006 that you were talking about, and Wormsley in 2014.
Wormsley was the one I was thinking of, but all I could remember was the Getty family owning a ground, and I couldn't remember the name of Wormsley. I batted at Wormsley, by the way. It's an incredibly good batting deck. I played a drive on the up. I swear, after I hit it, I went, I don't play drives on the up. How has this happened?
And also, England have now gone 9 years and 9 matches without a win versus India, which is quite spectacular, right? So they've got the wood over England. But anyway, we've covered a lot on women's cricket. It's time to move on to Ireland versus Zimbabwe. And after winning the T20 International Series by a margin of 2-1, Ireland have also defeated Zimbabwe in the ODI series. First game got washed out and they won the remaining 2 games. And I guess the standout story is that in the second game, Josh Little took 6 for 36, and it's been a while since we've talked about Josh Little, right? He sprung up as this outrageous talent left-arm seamer for Ireland, and then kind of faded away, partly because of injury as well, but was bagging franchise deals, which is quite huge. And now he's once again proven that he can be that wild card option in that bowling attack that could push Irish cricket back to the forefront, or whatever forefront they occupied in the recent past, back there again, because things have kind of dwindled for them, haven't they?
Yeah, I mean, Ireland have had a weird period for a long while now, and this series comes at an odd time because of where Zimbabwe cricket is as well. Both of them are going through, I suppose, funks in certain ways, despite the fact that both of them have quite talented lineups. I wonder how much is everyone in cricket is better at the moment, and these two teams are running into that. But yeah, look, Josh Little is definitely a next level talent, and has been for quite some time. He's still not fully developed, and he might not be for another year, even 2 years. But at his absolute best, his best delivery is completely world class. And there are a lot of teams in the world that probably would have liked to have him in their ODI World Cup, let alone their T20 World Cup.
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember Multan Sultan snapped him up in the previous PSL, but he got injured. He got an IPL gig as well. Let's hope that there are better things in store for Josh Little and Irish cricket. And some of the usual performers who had been out of form have performed, right? Curtis Camphor in one game got 66 with the bat and a 4-wicket haul in the other. And then Andy Balbirnie, former captain, he scored 82. So it's good that, performers who had done well for Ireland in the past and hadn't been in the best of form recently are coming to the fore, and they could probably assist Harry Tector and Lachlan Tucker, and this could be a quality outfit again.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly signs that Ireland cricket has some good players. There's just some weaknesses I'm not sure that they can overcome. The way they play spin sometimes, certainly the way they bowl spin. They've got a lot of guys who are very good with the new ball. But they don't always have, good seamers who are good outside of the new ball, just little things like that. But the overall talent, I think, is still there for them.
I mean, they won this ODI series quite comfortably, and that definitely augurs well for them. And on the other end, Zimbabwe have only won 1 out of 5 completed fixtures on this tour, which is quite disappointing because Zimbabwe too. I mean, Sikandar Azabad doesn't perform for one series, and they've lost that as well. And he was sidelined in a few games because of a ban or suspension, actually. And barring who was it? Yeah, barring Joy Lord Gumby, love that name, one of the best names in cricket. No other Zimbabwe batter crossed 50 in this ODI series, and that is definitely a cause for concern.
Yeah, I think their strength is bowling, and so their batting is certainly not up to that level, and we've seen it a lot, really. Even when they've been really good, they've quite often been one batter and Sikandar sort of get together too often, and I'm not a massive fan of their batting. Them and Namibia, both quite weak when you look at those top 4, top 5s, but they make up for it a little bit in the middle order, and then both have really good bowling attacks. But Zimbabwe, again, should be better than they're doing. And they seem to be, considering that it is a lineup with some really talented players in it, it's really disappointing what they've been doing for a while now.
Do you think Dave Houghton's under the pump?
I mean, he probably is because they're not winning, right? But I don't think it's Dave Houghton that is the issue there. I think it probably is it's very hard to win consistently when you don't have 4 or 5 batters. Like, they don't have a Lachlan Tucker or a Harry Tector, right?
Yeah.
They, let alone a Paul Sterling or Andy Balbirnie or any. I'm not sure where their best top 4 batter. Which other teams in the world would take players from Zimbabwe from that top 4, right? Like, I don't think there really are many teams that would take a single player out of that.
Maybe the Dutch, only the Dutch, perhaps.
Even I would say the Dutch top 4 is better than by distance better than Zimbabwe's top 4. So, and we're not, the Dutch top 4 is still, a weakness for them at times. So, look, I do think it's an issue. But I don't think it's a coaching one. But yeah, they would probably fire the coach because that's how sports does things.
Yeah, let's see what the chevrons have in store for us. There's always a controversy around over there as well. But anyway, that pretty much sums this episode up. We had Shaurya Pathak say Pakistan is always there to rescue Warner's career. There should be a stand named after Warner in the Gaddafi. I'm not opposed to that. The Dave Warner stand in the Gaddafi Stadium. It's already called the Gaddafi Stadium, so might as well have a David Warner stand over there, right? And Alexander Cockburn says not against India, against everyone, right? I might have made a mistake over there again, so pardon me. And Sean Williams isn't that good. RSR has
Sean Williams is 37 years old, right? And he was a fine player, back in his day. But like in T20 cricket, I think he averages 23 or something. Like, what are we talking about here? Sean Williams is a really good second-tier county player, right? If he's your best batter, and I think that's the problem. They've got plenty of seam, a couple of great spinners, all-rounders in their spinners. There's lots to like about him, but you can't win consistently unless you can put pressure on with bat and with ball. And too often, they don't do that. So Vuyo is saying, Sikandar Raza and Ryan Bell, we've been talking about them. We don't have any problem with them. They don't bat in the top four. They don't bat in the top four.
On Sikandar Raza, but Vuyo, you should definitely go check that out. And thanks for tuning in. We love the fact that you're tuning in from Zimbabwe, Harare, right?
And the issue is that those are not top four players. You get your runs consistently from your top four. If your number 5 keeps saving you, which is what Sikandar Raza does, that is a huge issue. Sean Williams is 37 and has never made runs consistently in T20 cricket. And Ryan Bell's like a number 6, number 7 player. Really, he is a reason, because of him and Sikandar, that all-rounderness gives them a huge amount of cricket talent, right? It gives them flexibility that they have access to. But when it comes down to it, if you want to win games of cricket consistently, you need a top 4 to make runs. You can't just rely on your bowlers bailing you out again and again. And too often when Zimbabwe have had to do that because their top 4 doesn't make enough runs. And that's right across everything at the moment.
And it's sad because when you look at Ngarava and Muzarabani, you've got...
the bowling's great. I love their bowling attack. It's
really talented pace attack, right?
It's exciting. And then you throw in the 2 all-rounders as well. And you've suddenly got... They can go into any game with 6 bowling options without losing much in their batting. But if you're 4 for 100 in a one-day game and you're scoring at 4.5 runs and over, that means Sikandar or Ryan Bell has to go completely nuts, or someone down the order has to go completely nuts. You can't be in a situation where you do that. And too often that's been the case. And so Vuyo's talking about, the board. We know the board's a problem, right? But the top 4 is a problem. And the problem with Zimbabwe cricket is that if you don't get the technical things right, eventually they are going to sack Dave Houghton. They are going to make mistakes in selection. They are not going to pay their players and all the normal things that Zimbabwe cricket do. But the truth is that I don't think they have 4 world-class top 4 players in a way that even the Netherlands do. Like you were saying before, I think Netherlands are in a much better situation looking at, Max O'Dowd and Colin Ackerman and those sorts of players and Vikram and all those sorts of guys being able to bat in their top 4 than what you're talking about with Zimbabwe. And Netherlands don't have a good top 4, right?
Yeah.
So it's really hard to win consistently with that. And then all you need is your bowlers to not be in great form. So there was one of the games that Zimbabwe lost in the World Cup qualifiers where I can't remember who it was, but 2 of their bowlers did incredible. One of their bowlers was okay, and 2 of them had bad days, and they lost the game. That's because they're only playing on one side of the ball. It's all bowling, right? And that's a huge issue for that.
Might have been Scotland, if I remember correctly.
I can't remember, I remember the game. I remember watching it, but I can't remember who was in it now. Yeah. There's a lot of cricket on. We've talked about 83 games today.
Yeah, I swear to God, we thought that the cricket would die down, but we've literally, look at our title section. It's got so many series, but we're finally towards the end of it. Sukant said, does Brendan Taylor, do you think he'll return? Well, no, not after everything he's been through. And Vuyo says that he loves our podcast. It's the best. So thank you for all the love. Subscribe to this channel, subscribe to Jared's other channel, like this video, share it with your friends, do all of that stuff. Keep tuning into our content. And this is it for Uncovered episode 63. We'll be back with episode 64 next week. That's all from Jared Behram from this week. Have a good one, guys. Goodbye.
If you like these live chats, head over to our main channel where we have all sorts of video on this World Cup. There'll be several every week with all the latest trends, stories, and incredible historical context. If you love sports and you have the hottest takes or the coldest mic drops, enroll in Fans with Laptops and we'll get them out there.